That's all the heads up there. Good. We'll remind everyone again in a few minutes. And we're just letting everyone get into the meeting here. Let me check my email, make sure no one's having difficulties logging in. That's good. So we're still waiting for one of our presenters, so we'll give them some time to hop on. Probably wait till about 11:05. I'll give people a few minutes. It's Friday. Here's Paul, great. Oh, hi, Paul. Good morning. Okay, as I mentioned, I'll give people maybe, good morning, give everyone maybe one more minute, waiting for a few people who've signed up before we get started here. Thank you everyone for being on time and here this morning.
It's kind of weird. I don't know. It's because she's saying she's waiting for another presenter, and I don't know if she doesn't know that you're in.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm showing up as Karen Lawrenson for some reason. I don't know how that happened.
I had trouble getting.
Yeah, I figured you were not Karen.
No, I'm not Karen.
My calendar and use the link from the calendar that I sent you.
Yeah.
I was able to get in, but I couldn't get in otherwise.
Yeah, I think it's because I'm sharing her link, maybe.
Okay.
So anyway, I'm an imposter.
We've got all of our presenters here and a couple other people who just filed in. So I think we are about ready to get started here. So good morning, everyone. Just a heads up, this meeting is being recorded. So just so that you're all aware. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Amy Smart. I'm the conservation specialist for the Upper Salinas Tablas Resource Conservation District. I have Liz McDonald here helping me as well with the technical side of things. I so appreciate her help. And we have some great presenters who we've partnered with on this program. We've got Paul Robbins with the Resource Conservation District of Monterey County. We've got Nora Bales with Camp Roberts and Rusty Hall with the SLO County Ag Commissioner's Office. I'm really grateful that you all could be here today. I know we're all pretty zoomed out these days, but the idea of a virtual workshop isn't ideal, but it's what we have for today. So hopefully we can make it interesting enough for you guys and get that Zoom fatigue out of the way and learn some more about Arundo. So before I launch the presentation, I would just like to do a quick poll of everybody who is attending to kind of get an idea of what your expertise, what your knowledge, what you're bringing to the table with Arundo. So how familiar are you with Arundo? Give you guys a chance to answer the poll here. Great, I see some answers coming in already. Perfect. So, there we go. I think that's everybody. Great. So we will. Perfect. Great. So let's see the results here. So it's good that we don't have anyone who doesn't know what Arundo is. So at least you all are familiar with, to some extent with Arundo. Slightly familiar, but I'm looking to learn more. Good. I'm hoping we can provide you some information today so that you'll leave feeling like knowledgeable and ready to address Arundo. A lot of you are currently working on Arundo eradication, which is great. And we have one landowner with Arundo on the property. So I'm interested to find out who that is. Hopefully we can discuss that after the end of our presentations today. Don't see anyone as a self-proclaimed Arundo expert, but based on some of the presentations, I'd beg to differ for some of you. You seem to be really knowledgeable, so I'm excited to share these with you folks. So I will stop sharing that. And what I'm going to do is share my screen. We have one consolidated presentation for all of the presenters. So when we get to the next presentation, I will advance the slides for you all as needed. So let me go ahead and start the presentation. Let Andy into the waiting room first, I guess. Hi, Andy. All right, so as mentioned, I'm Amy Smart, Conservation Specialist with the Upper Salinas Tablas Resource Conservation District. It's a long title, so it's a good thing my name is short. We are currently working on a few different Arundo programs within our district with the help of our fantastic partners. We are working on the California Department of Food and Agriculture funds today for this workshop. Funding under their Noxious Weeds grant program. We are building upon the previous efforts done by other agencies within our district to generate a comprehensive map of Arundo within the Upper Salinas watershed. We also have funding from the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the NRCS, through their Regional Conservation Partnership Program. That funding is also to continue to build upon the mapping efforts done by other agencies. And there's also funding in that program to do some eradication work on properties that qualify for EQIP funding, which is an environmental cost incentives type program for landowners who qualify to be able to do good environmental work on their property with assistance from the NRCS. The partners that we have on this program include the Resource Conservation District of Monterey County, Camp Roberts, and San Luis Obispo County Agricultural Commissioner. Let's see, the photograph that I have here on the side is actually a location in San Miguel that I happened to stumble upon. It is a really large stand of Arundo, and I have a full picture of it in a slide that's a little bit further down in the presentation that you'll get to see. So we're talking about the Salinas River. I'm sure many of you are familiar with what the Salinas River is, where it's located. We're all local, and a lot of you seem to already have some knowledge of Arundo, so you must be aware of where we're located at least. The headwaters of the Salinas River are in Santa Margarita. There's the Santa Margarita Lake, and it then flows north where it eventually meets the Pacific Ocean in the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. There's many inputs from multiple tributaries along the Salinas River, most notably the Estrella River and Nacimiento River. As I'm sure many of you are aware, there's also a dam at the Lake Nacimiento. So having dams at both major headwaters for the Salinas River really impacts the ecosystem. I believe Paul Robbins has a good slide in his presentation that will go a little bit more in depth on that. What makes management of the Salinas River so challenging is that it does cross two different county lines. There's many agencies, many municipalities, county players, all these people that are responsible for maintaining the health of the river ecosystem, but often they're not in communication with each other. So one of the big roles that the RCD plays is bringing together all of these players in addition to local landowners to really help identify the projects that are going on within the watershed and how we can pull them together to make more of a program. So to secure more funding, to really make our money go as far as we can when we want to get boots on the ground, you need to prioritize projects. And if you do it from a programmatic level versus piecemealing project by project, you really can get more done and your project will be more effective in the long run. Back in 2004, the Upper Salinas Las Tablas RCD put together a watershed action plan for the Upper Salinas watershed. That's where this image comes from. It's available online, and we also have it on our website if you'd like to learn more about the information presented in that plan. There's also a lot of really important considerations as far as habitat goes for the Salinas River. As many of you probably know, it's a steelhead-bearing stream. There's sensitive species that depend on the habitat that the Salinas River provides, such as kit fox, red-legged frogs, all sorts of plants and birds, vireos that are highly dependent on the really unique ecosystem and habitat that the Salinas River watershed provides. And to eradicate an invasive species in that watershed requires collaborations between, as I said, multiple agencies and stakeholders. So what is Arundo? Fortunately, no one said that they didn't know what it is, so I'll just briefly touch on how it got here. It was first introduced by Spanish colonists to California to use as erosion control and to stabilize the stream bank and construction material as well. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers originally planted it also to help with stream bank stabilization. And then, like many times, we realize after the fact that it's highly invasive and has become a problem for multiple reasons. In 2011, the California Invasive Plant Council again determined that the Salinas River watershed had the second largest infestation of Arundo in California. So it's a big issue. It grows in really dense stands along the floodplain and stream banks that essentially clog the river from flowing. It can cause all sorts of associated issues, like water can back up behind it and then will begin to erode and impact adjacent farmland or roads, as we've seen a lot after the big storm we had last month. It can become a problem when the river is clogged and you get a huge rain event. All that water has to go through there, and if there's a lot of vegetation clogging the channel, erosion will occur. So we know that Arundo is a problem. Let's figure out how we can identify it in the field. So here is the wide angle view of the Arundo donax that I had found in San Miguel. I was actually out doing some site surveying to find locations where I could access the riverbed safely. Access is challenging as many of the properties are privately owned or owned by municipalities throughout the Salinas River. So what looks like an access point from an aerial image might not really be the safest way to get in. So it requires often driving through neighborhoods to find a good access point. I turned around in one neighborhood and right there, planted in somebody's front yard, was a perfect example of a large stand of Arundo. In the past, it had been used as a landscaping plant for a privacy screen. It grows quickly. It has been marketed in landscape nurseries, wholesale nurseries. Fortunately, not so much in California, I'm finding, but in other parts of the country, it is sold in nurseries as a landscaping plant and ornamental. And the photograph on the right is a location that, again, I was looking for a spot to be able to survey the Salinas and happened to come across a stand of Arundo. You can see that the sign that shows the weight limit is for a bridge that's in the foreground there where the stop sign is, and that bridge goes over Atascadero Creek. Atascadero Creek is a tributary to the Salinas River, so this stand, this population could easily make its way downstream, further spreading the population in the Salinas River. So Arundo resembles bamboo. It grows really quickly and really tall, similarly to bamboo as well. Also has some similarities to corn plants. I've heard people say the leaf structure can remind people of that. The one that you will most commonly associate it with that it resembles that you will find in the Salinas River is common reed, Phragmites species most specifically. There's a large amount of Phragmites that's in the Salinas River. There are a few different stands in Templeton, Atascadero, and then north kind of in the Wellsona area just before San Miguel. So Arundo is a perennial plant. This photograph here is from a stand in the Salinas River that has been treated by the Ag Commissioner's office. It has obviously been there for a few years. You can see some of the old growth in the dead vegetation that has remained and some of the newer stands that are stalks that are growing behind it. So that one's definitely been there for a few years. You'll typically find it along the stream bank and in the floodplain. Often you won't find it within the active channel. So if you do find a plant that's within the active channel of the Salinas River that resembles Arundo, most likely it's the common reed or Phragmites. It could very well be Arundo, but I have found in my surveying of this area that in the stream channel itself, it's most likely Phragmites. So again, here we have a side-by-side comparison where you have giant reed versus the common reed. So we have Arundo on the side. You can see the quickest way to identify the difference that I've found is the seed heads. You can notice that on the left, you have Arundo with the more erect seed heads. On the right, the Phragmites, they tend to be bowed slightly. The inflorescences are definitely different between the two. An interesting fact about Arundo is that it does not reproduce through seed in North America. The seeds that are produced are sterile, and it tends to reproduce through rhizomes, which becomes a greater issue when there is a large flooding event that dislodges the plant and sends it downstream, where it can easily grab hold of some soil and reproduce elsewhere. Just because you have a large flooding event that's moving the Arundo out of that section of the river, it doesn't mean it's completely eradicated, that Arundo. It will continue to grow by just a tiny piece of rhizome. It will crowd out native vegetation because it grows so quickly, and it provides really poor habitat for animals and birds as it doesn't provide good valuable seeds, doesn't attract pollinators or any native insects, and it uses substantially more water than native vegetation. So it will outcompete natives for water, for nutrients, and it will leave the ecosystem a lot less healthy as a result. It also poses a big fire hazard. Fires become a big topic of conversation in California. As we all know, we're doing our best to identify areas where we can reduce our wildfire risk. And so the Salinas River in particular, there has been a big push to do some vegetation management in this the section that isn't passerable, especially just last year, there was a pretty significant fire right in the riverbed that did make it to the residential area, and some homes were lost in the process. So by helping to eradicate Arundo, we're also helping to reduce the fire risk within the watershed. Another native that common reed, that giant reed and common reed also look like is wild rye. I've come across a few small populations within the watershed that at first glance look like they could be Arundo, but after further inspections, they're wild rye. The leaf patterns are slightly different and the seed heads are different as well, but it's just another one that could trick you at first if you are not very familiar. So what the RCD is doing with our funding from CDFA for the Noxious Weeds grant is we are utilizing aerial imagery to build upon the previous efforts done by other agencies to map Arundo in the Upper Salinas watershed. What I have found in searching for available aerial imagery is there are a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of map layers that you can get for GIS. There's a lot of different companies that do flyovers. You can pay for helicopter surveys. You could do a drone survey of an area. There's definitely a lot of government databases that are actively collecting aerial imagery and posting them online. But I have found the quickest, most user-friendly and cost-effective method for our resource, or for our purposes rather, is to use Google Earth. It's not the most recent aerial imagery, but for this section of the Salinas River that we are looking at, the Upper Salinas, the aerial imagery is from September 2018. So it's recent enough that we can go in and get a really good understanding of where populations that have known to be Arundo are occurring and how we can identify whether or not they have grown, whether or not they have been eradicated, and what the kind of landowner access might be, and consolidating all that information so that we can eventually go in and prioritize eradication efforts. We have another poll for you here to give you an idea of what I'm doing here. We have an activity for you. So looking at this aerial image, can you find the Arundo? We'll have Liz launch that poll in a second. There we go. So look at each grid there, and you're doing your best to identify where Arundo is located in the grid. I want a chance to answer here. There's a lot of vegetation that's in the Salinas River that could look similar to Arundo, as we've discussed. 40% have voted. We'll give you some more time. It's 12 out of 15. There we go. Okay. All right. Welcome. All right, so we're just about to close out the poll here. I'll go ahead and end polling so we can go over our results. Great. Okay. So here we have the results of the poll. And it looks like someone has identified Arundo in all of these quadrants. At least one has been marked. So this is a good exercise for everyone to see kind of what I'm doing when I'm looking at aerial imagery, is try to identify the patterns, look at what the vegetation could or could not be. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the results and give you all the answers. So there you can see I've identified where the Arundo stands are located. We've got 3 different, so it's kind of a trick question. So there were 3 different quadrants in which Arundo was located. We had A1, B1, and C1. You can see that it's kind of more on the floodplain, the stream bank. It's not in the active channel itself. If you look at the pattern that's associated, you can see the branching that comes from the Arundo stalks itself. It almost has like a fuzzy look to it versus the cottonwoods or sycamore trees that are obviously, you can see the shadow from them. So it shows you that it's a taller tree. But that's pretty much a lot of what I'm doing with the current aerial imagery we have access to, is going through the sections of the Salinas that are within our district boundaries and identifying what could or could not be Arundo, and then going out and ground truthing it. All of the efforts that our partners have done have really helped set the stage for us to continue that effort. But the RCD maybe has a little bit more leeway with getting landowner access. It might be slightly easier for a resource conservation district to get access versus all the hoops that sometimes a county ag commissioner may have to go through for treatment, or just difficulty getting from one spot to another with our time. It's challenging to fit all these things in. So now you've had a chance to look at the aerial image. These are the ground photographs of the Arundo. Fortunately, as I mentioned, those images were from 2018. And since then and currently, the SLO County Ag Commissioner is treating these stands of Arundo. They are documented in CalFlora, the database that provides insight and guidance for us to go off of where the known stands of Arundo are. So we're building off of that database a lot. The picture on the left is actually one that was located in A1 from the grid, and it can show you kind of, again, on the stream bank is where it's located. It's mixed in with native vegetation. There's coyote brush that's right there, as well as non-native grasses and other invasive weedy species, but it's mixed in, especially on the right. You can get an understanding of how Arundo can be underneath trees, and you won't be able to see that from aerial imagery because the larger tree will be blocking it. So it's really essential that we get on the ground to verify where Arundo is located. Field testing is everything. We can only get so much from aerial imagery. So we eventually have to go in the field and verify that that's what it is. once you have identified that, yes, that is Arundo, it is located in the Salinas, here is the point. Next step is removal. This photograph is actually from the RCD of Monterey County. They're doing some great efforts with their eradication program, and we'll have Paul Robbins go into that a little bit more, but just some of the difficulties that go with eradicating Arundo. It's privately owned land, which often is difficult to access. Any work done in a waterway, you need a permit for, often multiple permits from multiple agencies, and that process can be arduous. And for private landowners, they often will not be familiar with it and just not do the work as a result. You have to monitor projects like this constantly. It's required for permits. There's different methods of removal, and I will now hand it over to Paul so he can highlight more of his program. So Paul, if you could go ahead and unmute yourself, that would be great. Thank you.
Alrighty, here I am. So yeah, thanks for advancing slides as I go. Just a quick, I want to acknowledge Emily Zefferman, who is our lead for the Salinas River work. She is on maternity leave, so she spent the last 5 years killing things, and now she's making new life. So we allowed her to prioritize that, and so she's the smart person in the room, or not in the room, and she'll be back in April. So if you do have questions to follow up, you can ask me. I got to start the program, but she's really the one carrying the ball now. Next slide, please. So basically, we are, I'm just going to give you a quick run through, and I'll skip some things in the interest of time. But a little bit of background, how we're doing it, and some of the things that we've learned. So let's go to the next slide. You've already seen a map of the Salinas River, so I don't need to get into that. This is really the focus on Monterey County, where we've been doing our work. And we'll leave it at that. Next slide, please. You've heard a little bit about the Arundo invasion along the river, and we've gleaned a lot on the information provided by the California Invasive Plant Council. That's where we started from. That's what we based our original grant proposals on. And when I started work on this in 2009, we were starting to head into a drought. And when we started the work in 2014, the actual physical, like multiple acreage work, was behaving very differently than it was in 2017 after the drought ended. And there's been a lot of expansion recently with the additional water. Well, what do you know? Next slide, please. I think you've heard already about the problems that Arundo causes. So this is just the purpose of this image is those are cottonwoods and or willows that the drought pretty much did in, but there's the Arundo coming right back because it's so good at laying low and dormant during bad times. And so there's a lot of dead trees along the river after the 20-teens. Next slide, please. Quick history of the program. The Ag Commissioner of Monterey County had some initial funding from the Weed Management Area Program at CDFA. They enlisted the RCD's assistance in developing permits and grant funding for developing a large-scale program, given that we had such a massive invasion. We also have major flooding problems on the Salinas River. If anyone is familiar with the impacts that the 1995 and 1998 floods had, and so there's huge public support for doing something. And Arundo control seemed like a way to get multiple benefits in terms of habitat improvement, flood conveyance improvement, water conservation, you name it. And so we were able to get that has been really the basis of the support for the work. Amy mentioned all the permits. There's a list for you. Happy to follow up with you on those later. And that was critical to have the consulting support from Jason Giesow. He is one of the heartbeats, one of the core members of the Cal IPSI board, and has led Arundo treatment programs in Southern California, after which this was modeled. Next slide, please. This all takes a truckload of money. We're guesstimating that on an per acre basis, it's approximately $10,000 per acre needed over multiple years to do a proper job of Arundo control. And I'd say that's a low estimate. Anyhow, we've gotten so far 3 big grants from the Wildlife Conservation Board, which has really been the lion's share of the work we've done. The USDA NRCS funding we've had, it's a big number, but getting people to accept USDA money has been very challenging. So we've only done a little bit of acreage with that. Then we did get some CDFA funds, and really the grease for all the wheels has been our ag commissioner. Without their base support, spending county funds, this couldn't have happened. And they've been a consistent, just basic support for the program that's been important for showing matching contribution locally. And there's also, of course, been landowners that have contributed directly or done their own work as well, because it is in their own best interest as well as the interest of the public. So next slide, please. So we're looking at about 350 parcels along the river. So it's a lot of people, a lot of landowner agreements needed. Multiple parcels sometimes are owned by the same entity. So far we've gotten about 41 agreements signed, but we've treated many more parcels than that, over 100, I would assume. But they are 10-year access agreements, and those are required by the grant funder. The state wants to make sure that if they're going to spend money, that it's sustainably, that it goes for something good. It's not a flash in the pan. So that's been critical too, because we've been doing this now for 7 seasons, and we're definitely needing to go back and touch up even after 2 or 3 or 4 seasons of work. Next slide, please. Amy described Arundo a bit. All I'll say is that because it has sterile seed, it only reproduces vegetatively in our region. And so it's a very logical weed to treat from top to bottom of watershed. The way it moves through the watershed is by pieces breaking off and then lodging somewhere else downstream and rooting. And so we've tried as much as possible to do an upstream to downstream treatment. This sort of raises the question, well, why is Monterey County doing anything when it's downstream of San Luis Obispo County and there's still Arundo up there? And at the time we started this program, the SLO County Ag Commissioner was totally on board, and Camp Roberts and others have been doing their own work. So we've been kind of trusting that that is still going, and that's why we partnered with the RCD, the Upper Salinas Las Tablas RCD, is to make sure that we're not getting reinvaded while doing our work down here. But we are striking while the iron's hot, which means sometimes it can't be perfectly upstream to downstream. We have to go back and check, and so we're doing that. But there are funding resources that have been available through the Stream Flow Enhancement Program with the Wildlife Conservation Board that we've really just had to jump on. And so our approach, I'm going to talk a little bit about, there are very large stands where you can get mowers in, so we'll use them, and especially during the drought when those large stands were dormant or dead, there was nothing to spray. So we actually stimulated growth by mowing the stands first. The next year they came up thick and beautiful like a cornfield, and they were super easy to spray. And then of course there are smaller stands, and frankly the least costly and the most logical approach is to spray only and leave the plants. But if you have a flood concern, you need to mow them to clear out the obstruction, because the Arundo just standing there, yes, it slows water down, but it also, in doing so, causes sediment and sand and rocks and such to drop out, and you actually increase the elevation of the stream or the floodplain, reducing its capacity to convey water. So, but the nutshell is mow if yes or no, and then treat with herbicide for multiple years. So that's at least 2, if not 3 or 4. Next slide, please. Here's a picture of the lovely mowers. These are big monsters. We contract with basically an orchard removal company. So they go through there, and for scale, I don't know if there's a human in there, but you can see the cab. These are big beasts. So in big fields, we mowed in year 1. Next slide. This is just a scene, an image of what it looks like just after mowing, and then what that gorgeous cornfield looks like the next year prior to going back and spraying. You'll see, by the way, in this picture where we didn't mow, and that's where it was within 10 feet of the river bank, which is on the left, or around protected, either there were bird nests or native plants that we didn't want to impact. And that Arundo, the next slide, gets treated with herbicide directly. And in the large acreages, we have a crew that's using a pump and literally thousands of feet of spray hose. And it is the spray is dyed blue, so we can confirm that we're only hitting the Arundo and not native plants. If we do hit native plants, we can limb them, the affected parts, as long as it's under a certain inch diameter. Next slide. So with an herbicide, you get what you expect. There you go. Looks pretty brown. Next slide, please. Spot treatments is going to be someone with a backpack sprayer. And there you can see the blue dye. Next slide, please. Trickier spots where there are hazards in the waterway, such as this, I think this is an old tetrahedron. They used to put those on the riverbanks for bank protection. No way a mower is going through that, or we're trying to protect water resources, or it's an organic producer, and we want to be very careful about overspray and absorbing their required buffers. Next slide, please. So that's what we call sort of the main watershed treatments. We also have been doing spot treatments in the upper watershed for very scattered small patches of Arundo and tamarisk, and so we're only doing spray treatments. And for us, the upper watershed is basically King City to Bradley, so all downstream still of San Luis Obispo County. And the base material that we use is glyphosate, but imazapyr mixed with glyphosate is shown to be more effective in terms of a really thorough kill. In terms of it's a slower acting herbicide that the plant has a good long time to absorb and translocate through as many rhizomes as we can possibly get it. And this stuff is amazingly tenacious. So it's good material. It is, however, a higher restriction level than glyphosate, so we have to be more careful, which is why we only use it for spot treatments. You don't want to get it on the ground. It is soil active and it will suppress native vegetation. So, though interestingly enough, and a side note, another project I worked on in Yolo County before I came here, we were doing Arundo and tamarisk treatment primarily on Cache Creek. They were using imazapyr, and because that is what you need to use on tamarisk to do a proper job of it. And lo and behold, coming up through what would have been imazapyr treated soil was valley elderberry, or the blue elderberry, which is a protected species because it has the valley elderberry longhorn beetle, which is a protected insect that feasts on it. So interesting that particular native, which is a highly desirable one by the wildlife folks, had no problem with imazapyr, at least on the ground. Next slide. We got some CDFA funding, and that enabled us to do even more mapping, such as Amy was describing. In this case, we got a team that uses a helicopter and scouts out individual plants, which you can see smack dab in the middle of this image, and the guy's literally leaning out of the helicopter with a super duper camera and getting that imagery. Next slide. This was Wildlands Conservation Science doing the work for us. And then they were able to do their own treatment, whether that meant getting in a canoe and trucking down the river, keep going. Next slide. Or just hiking through the woods and such. What was nice about Wildlands Conservation Science is they were able to do both the treatment and the biological monitoring that is required by our permits. And I won't go into detail on this. I'm assuming, Amy, you'll provide a PDF of the presentation, but we do everything that is required to make sure that there are no negative impacts from our work, and if there are, to mitigate for them. And to date, we have not had to do any mitigation because we've been very careful. We have a good biology team. They're temporary employees, but we also contract with consulting groups to provide oversight. Next slide. So just up to date, so far we've treated about 750 acres of the Arundo identified in Monterey County. That's approximately half of the acreage that was originally mapped in 2011 by the California Invasive Plant Council using aerial photography or satellite imagery. It's not necessarily halfway done, however, because there's been so much growth since the drought ended. Of course, now we're in our new drought. So there may be more than 750 acres of Arundo downstream of what we've treated to date. But so far, we're just past the Soledad Bridge and making our way to Gonzales. Next slide, please. We'll keep moving. Lessons learned. So we've been trying to learn from this, was I think is basic. One, how effective is the treatment, and what's happening with the plants, the native plants, and other weeds after treatment. Funding has gone almost entirely to removing Arundo with the idea that by getting rid of it, other plants can come in. So what we're calling passive restoration. We're doing a little bit of active restoration, but I won't touch on that today. So next slide. The survey methods, just a little bit of science, something to appeal to the scientists in the room in terms of our process, and so that we can actually give a fair analysis of the work. And so we've set up transects within treated and outside of treated areas, looking at Arundo cane density, species presence, and then percent cover of the various types of plants. Next slide, please. So what we've learned about treatment efficacy is, well, yeah, it's impressive when you spray it, but it is so tenacious. We have noticed that the more happily growing the Arundo, the more effectively it takes in the herbicide. And the larger the plant is, aka fully grown, not mowed, I think you get more leaf area to take that herbicide in and to have a more effective kill. Next slide, please. I think I'm going to sort of skip through this, but we have seen lots of plants coming back that you would recognize. Next slide, please. That includes noxious weeds, poison hemlock, perennial pepperweed. We've been treating the woody species. This is a quandary for us, and they are not concerns for the farming community, but it's not beautiful, that's for sure. But it does not pose the threats that Arundo does to the watershed. Next slide, please. So we're making our way there. We have been trying to quantify as much as possible evapotranspiration or water consumption. And that we have seen a range based on who's doing the study of water savings by reducing Arundo between 19 acre-feet per acre per year, which means there's got to be a lot of water available and a high density of Arundo, or 1.5 acre-feet per acre per year. So, you know, an order of magnitude plus. And that's based on some satellite imagery and analysis from CSUMB. Next slide. So we're still working on that. We're not satisfied, but then the other fun stuff is we've been putting up wildlife cameras and looking at, you can move to the next slide, and looking at bats and invertebrates. We've got some bobcats. We saw our first badger. That's there in the middle right. Of course, foxes and coyotes and deer. Next slide. We've also been mapping or tracking, there we go, other species, how the presence or absence of Arundo, if we can compare the access for wildlife and the use by wildlife and the benefits to wildlife of this work. So that's all been very excited and funded by the Wildlife Conservation Board. And that's my last slide. I don't think you're going to have time for questions yet, so I'm just going to pass along. But Jasmine Ruvalcava was possibly, okay, will be joining us possibly today. She was going to call in from the field. Otherwise, she's filling in for Emily while Emily's off, but she's been a perennial part of our program. And there's their contact information as well. So,
great. Thank you so much, Paul.
thanks. Sure.
Next, we'll hand it over to Nora Bales, who's with Camp Roberts.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Amy, for the introduction, and thanks, Paul. That was very informative. I'm definitely not a self-proclaimed Arundo expert, but I'm learning, and today's been super helpful. I'm going to discuss a little bit of our past work, our current work, and our future directions for Arundo treatment at Camp Roberts. I'm Nora, as Amy said. I'm an environmental scientist for the California Army National Guard. And in my work for the California Army National Guard, I help them manage resources at state military installations throughout the state. And Camp Roberts is the biggest one of those. And we have a lot of water resources on the post. If you're familiar with the location, you'll know the rivers that flow through it. But if you're not, we're located in southern Monterey County and northern San Luis Obispo County, in the southern portion of the Salinas Valley, so the upper portion of the Salinas Watershed. And we're about 10 miles north of Paso Robles on Highway 101. And on the installation, we have the Salinas River, the Nacimiento River, and the San Antonio River. And you can kind of get an idea of that from the map I have there on the left. And we've been dealing with Arundo for quite some time at Camp Roberts. Our eradication project was actually started in 1999, so way before my tenure at the installation. And we've targeted this plant with regularity, basically every year as part of our integrated pest management program. And our integrated pest management program emphasizes the treatment of invasive plant species that both disrupt the environment and also have the potential to interfere with military readiness. So Camp Roberts is an active military training site, and this land is available for California Army National Guard soldiers to train in. And so Arundo actually poses a huge barrier to training activities, and often caring for the environment and caring for military lands go hand in hand. And all of our work controlling invasive plants, managing riparian habitat, and conserving endangered species is funded by the Department of the Army in support of the military mission at Camp Roberts. So Arundo is our highest priority invasive plant species for control, and we regularly survey for its presence in our riparian habitats. And to manage Arundo, we've used a combination of mechanical and chemical control, cutting some inflorescence stalks. I just learned today that they can be sterile, so maybe we'll move away from that in the future. And removing some of the big biomass to get it out of the river. And we also treat plants with a foliar spray or a cut stump treatment of aquamaster or habitat. And luckily for us, as you can see on the right-hand map, we deal with pretty small isolated clumps of Arundo. I've even had to enlarge those little red dots, which are Arundo infestations at Camp Roberts, just so you could see them on the map. And annually, we might treat an acre, but more often it's a few hundred square feet or even 15 square feet, just depending on the year. And all of our Arundo is isolated to the northern part of our installation in Monterey County along the Nacimiento and Salinas Rivers. And this has already been emphasized, but it's very important, so I'll bring it up again. Aside from its impacts on military readiness and training activities, Arundo has a really big environmental impact. And it's a particularly concerning species for me as an environmental scientist because of its potential to significantly alter our riparian habitat. These are extremely important areas for fish and wildlife, and at Camp Roberts specifically, we manage for the presence of least-billed vireo, bald eagles, the special status steelhead trout, and numerous other reptiles, amphibians, and birds that use the waterways. And aside from their value as habitat, our riparian areas are very functional. They help reduce flood flows and damage from floods, which, as Amy pointed out, we were very grateful for. And that extreme rain event we had last month, that was intense, but we survived. And I think part of that is because our waterways are pretty healthy. And our riparian areas help recharge groundwater, which is important in the very dry portion of northern SLO County where we're located. And they provide a myriad of other benefits. So we take our riparian area management very seriously at Camp Roberts. Next slide, please. So luckily for us, our Arundo management is not exceeding our capacity currently. We are able to get to it every year. We have just a little bit of treatment that we do, like I said, and we actually have more treatment planned for later this year. We have about an acre, maybe a little bit less of Arundo that we want to revisit. And the manageable size of our Arundo problem, I think, is thanks in part to our upstream neighbors who prevent it from getting onto the installation. So for that, I'm very grateful. And we want to improve our management to help prevent Arundo from ending up downstream. So we don't want the Monterey County RCD to be dealing with our Arundo problem. So we try to be very vigilant. And one way in which we're trying to improve our management is to develop an early detection and rapid response program at Camp Roberts and get not only our environmental staff, but other staff on the installation trained to recognize Arundo and also trained to be able to respond to it more quickly. In the past, we've relied on contract work, which usually occurs only once a year, but if we're able to see it and deal with it faster, then we'll have a smaller problem in the future, hopefully. And then as part of this, we're also developing a finer scale, more dynamic map to help us better see if we're repeatedly treating the same areas or if we're starting to deal with new infestations that occur close to previously treated areas. We don't have a really good record of this, so I'm not sure if we've been treating the same plants over and over again, or if we're actually treating new plants that are just coming up sporadically. And we just want to be able to track these new infestations to get a better idea of how our work is going and how far our efforts are going to treat this plant. And one thing that I'm really excited about is our partnerships that we've been building with the various RCDs and with the counties. I'm new to this position, so it's very exciting for me to be included as part of this workshop. And I've really learned a lot, and I look forward to what we can all accomplish in the Salinas watershed to help, if not eradicate, then decrease the cover of Arundo. Can I get my next slide, please? And that's it. It's pretty simple. We're not doing a ton of work, but we're being very vigilant, and we're trying to prevent the spread of this invasive plant. So thank you. If you have any questions about our natural resource management or our invasive plant management, please feel free to reach out. My email is on the slide.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nora. And last but not least, we'll go to Rusty Hall with the San Luis Obispo County of Ag. He's with the Ag Commissioner's Office.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm not Karen Lawrence, and we're sharing the same link. So anyway, I'm going to give a brief kind of a history of where we've been and where we're planning to go and what our department does. Essentially, and we work closely with CDFA, and we really target a lot of different species of weeds, Arundo being one of the more important ones. CDFA categorizes weeds by calling them either an A-rated or B-rated or C-rated. And based on that, it gives us direction at the commissioner level of what we do target. And Arundo being, I believe, a B-rated weed, it is certainly in our target zone. So I kind of wanted to start with, the common definition of a weed was any weed that grows out of place. But next slide shows that a weed is a plant that not only grows in the wrong place, but it intends to stay. So I really like that quote better. So next slide. Watershed surveys is really how we did start. We actually have been targeting Arundo for probably since 1990. We were kind of targeted and conducted from the top of the watershed down. We had several different data sources that we utilized. In the past, we used an old, GPS positioning system. And since then, we can now use smartphones with CalFlora Observer Pro, which makes it very, very convenient. We also verify outside sources. Again, CalFlora. We've been recently using iNaturalist to verify and ground, truth things, and we have our own internal records. Next slide. Here's a historical map that shows 1990 on, or 1999 on, and we had primarily targeted some of the Santa Rosa and the Chorro Creek areas, and that was quite difficult because that's extensive and it gets to be quite thick in there, and we have various ticks and poison oak and things like that. Mark Lee had originally the program. He's now the assistant commissioner, and he did a very good job. Next slide. Back then, we actually used the GPS, and this shows up to 2007 how we hit areas of Churro Creek, and we were marking clumps and size and diameters, and had gone in and treated and removed them over the years. Next slide. So currently now we're expanding our database from our historical information that we have on file to CalFlora's, and we surveyed essentially in 2018 to 2020. We had a couple intrepid inspectors who were very adventurous, and we were able to get some resources for it as an additional quad runner because of safety reasons. We didn't want an individual to go by themselves. So it took 3 days, and Regilio Ayan and James Moore actually traveled this entire river from the bottom of Atascadero all the way up to the Monterey border, and we were able to document about probably 16 clumps, it looks like in the records. And what's really lucky here that we found out is that these clumps probably aggregated together probably no more than an acre. So we do have really an opportunity here to get this under control and possibly even eradicate it, and at least keep it highly suppressed. So we have, according to our records, we've actually already treated some on the side banks, and it looks like about 7 of those have been treated out of the 16. So next slide. So we come a long ways now. We have our own weed mapping program. So we create these weed tickets for tracking. So this is a snapshot of our own internal weed mapping system. We can query it for any date, range, or weed, and color coded to whether it's a survey, which is green, or red, which has been treated. So using that data, then we can do follow-ups, and we actually can mark those in our program as a follow-up. Next slide. So we have, like I said earlier, a good achievability for following up on the Salinas corridor here. We've got a few isolated location. Patches are small. They're much more accessible than past locations, such as along Choro Creek. Those were difficult, but we can get in with equipment possibly along some of these locations. And through grant funding right now, we just, like I said, maybe I mentioned earlier, but we acquired an additional second quad runner. And we're in the process right now, in fact, of getting that quad runner equipped, excuse me, with some spray equipment. It's going to look really nice when it's done. So we do, being a government agency, we do have a few categorical exemptions, but I still need to work with some of the local Regional Water Quality Control Board and looking at additional permits that may be required if we have to work within the actual water corridor itself. We have a very good property owner database system to attain, so we can obtain permission to treat, because part of that is, in order for us to discharge a pesticide on any permit or on any property, you have to obtain permission from the property operator. Next slide. So the old record keeping was pretty, this is just a historical document showing how we used to keep it in an Excel program. It was kind of amusing to me to review these because Mark Lee had a sense of humor, and it was like, if you look at the clump names, that he finally went from just numbering them to calling them different names: Pig Hollow, Candyland, Hackapath, because this was extremely difficult in some of these areas. I think he said the Candyland came from a poor homeless guy who was really into eating a lot of candy and left the wrappers behind. So anyway, next slide. So this is a snapshot of our new record keeping system, which is very, very nice system. We have an actual computer database. We record now with the satellite map points, and we record the actual herbicides used and the rates. The surveys are tracked along, even recorded if we do hand removal. If any work is needing follow-up, that's marked as a follow-up. If it's a complaint, we mark that as a follow-up. And then we can query this program in any way for follow-ups or complaints, or even that map I showed you earlier. Next slide. So the Arundo control measures that we're using is primarily a foliar herbicides. As you saw in some of the earlier slides, we generally just spray the standing clump because they're small enough to do that. Some of the areas we've done optional, the cut stump herbicide treatment method, and quart cut and then do foliar. But as Paul was mentioning earlier, we try to wait until the clumps are up, growing very vigorously, and then we try to treat in late summer, early fall. And we're using a combination of glyphosate and imazapyr, which goes under the name of Polaris. Both of these are labeled for waterways. In fact, I include it's called the MOA-9 and MOA-2 because this is called the mode of action. One of the benefits of combining glyphosate and imazapyr is that because they have two different modes of action, you can avoid resistance over 100-fold. So that's the process. And as Paul mentioned earlier, imazapyr, it seems to give a little longer residual. It gets down into the rhizome mass better, for lack of a better word. So tarping isn't feasible. We kind of looked at that in the past, and it just basically punches through. But we did give it a try just for to see if it would work. Next slide. Again, here's just another shot of how we'd go in and we'd find a small patch. This is, I believe, is along Choro Creek, and we would do a cut stump method. But that's logistically difficult for larger clumps. Again, a foliar application of glyphosate to uniform regrowth has proven to be very effective, especially when we conduct it in the early fall. All right, next slide. Removal of the mass is difficult. Again, we have nothing compared to like Monterey County, but small pioneer outlier plants can be cut and stump treated on the spot. And larger clumps can be removed by us. We've done some work with the CCC and other contractors. All plants removed require follow-up activities, typically foliar applications and resurveying for sprouting. Next slide. Disposal, again, is difficult. Some areas we've done basically we've, at this point on, we've hauled it to the landfill if it's small enough clumps, leave it standing in place. And burning used to be allowed, but we don't even touch that anymore. It's very limited, or we don't do it because of drought and fire hazards. It can be removed and chipped. We've done that in the past. Chipping is actually the best, but it can be a lot of work as well, depending on how much biomass you're dealing with. The main idea is not to try to leave anything that's viable in the river corridor or waterway, because of course a cane or certainly a rhizome could reestablish a clump somewhere down the stream later on, or river. Next slide. So follow-up and surveys are really important for us in retreatment goes, because you can see here's a spot that we found a sprout coming up. So removing as much viable biomass from the riverbed as possible is the best, but it's difficult. Resurveying the project annually is our goal, and retreating any surviving portions of Arundo clumps or resprouting clumps. Next slide. And this is something I don't recommend, but it just shows you how dense the biomass is. You can actually stand on it. And I just want to point out, these are all really actually pretty sharp, but it's extremely dense. And even when cut, you can see why it was planted and used by the Spanish for building material. Next slide. So biocontrol, hope is on the horizon. I just kind of want to touch on this. I was able to find some information on it. It's currently under evaluation on some of these. Most of these come from Spain and France and the Mediterranean area where Arundo exists. The biocontrol agents were found by USDA when they were surveying, and they were searched for and brought back under permit. Some are more effective than others. The 4 species that they found that's in review and introduction is a scale insect, a wasp and an Arundo fly, and a leaf sheath miner, which is another type of fly. The scale insect appears to be highly effective in dense concentrations of Arundo. It attacks the actual rhizome and shows the most promise. It has a big impact on the plant's growth and spread. The wasp actually was released in Texas in April in 2009, seems to be working. It attacks the main stem forming galls, putting out smaller shoots and weakening the plant and reducing the overall height by shortening the internodes. The Arundo fly eats the inside of new shoots, and then there's this leaf miner that does the same essential thing, including leaves. Next slide. So here's a picture of that scale insects. We have the crawler stage on the left in A, and then you have the B and C showing the different, the male and female. And then you can, E shows how that causes a shortening and stresses the plant. The scale likes to attack near the rhizome where new shoots are coming up. You can see on the right side there. Next slide. Here's the wasp. It's inserting egg masses into the stalk. It seems to be doing fairly well. And I was going to jump ahead here and see what I had written down on my notes. Apparently, this wasp has been found in Southern California already, and it's all the way up into Ventura in the south portion. Any of these biocontrol agents I haven't seen in our county, but we're going to start looking for them. The wasp, they found out in combination with the scale insect, actually does a pretty good number on stressing Arundo, but they're discovering that just those 2 alone isn't probably enough. They need a 3rd or even a 4th biocontrol agent to attack other parts of the plant that would really be helpful. So this one bores in the shoot again and causes galls. Next slide. This is the Cryptonerva fly. It's from Spain and France, and it affects the young shoots. It's primarily active in May to June through July. This is still being evaluated. It attacks the shoots up to 30 inches in height, and it creates, it impregnates the stem with eggs, and then basically causes an hourglass effect. and then creates more witch brooming on the plant. And that's one source that I read showed that there may have been an unintentional release in Southern California, but I haven't found any more data on that. Next slide. This is a Lasioptera donaxis fly. It's a leaf sheath mining midge. It's kind of an interesting fly in the sense it's from the Western Mediterranean. It's being reviewed by USDA. And this was done in December of 2016. And what they're doing is basically an environmental assessment, making sure it doesn't cause any other problems on other plants. It has an interesting commensal, I guess would be the term, relationship with a fungus. The female seeks out the fungus to mix with the eggs that it lays, and you can see the fungus in the channels of the maggots that are eating the plant Arundo. But the idea is that the spores that the female lays with those eggs will then turn into a mycelial mass that helps provide an additional nutrition to those eggs that hatch into the maggots. Next slide. So during our survey, we did find other Salinas River invaders. We did find some tamarisk, so we're going to mark those and maybe do some follow-up later on that. And just to mention, we did find stinkwort, Detrichia. It's an annual weed that's pretty much pervasive throughout the whole county, and no longer do we target it except in some special situation. But it is an annual, and we did find spots of it along these Salinas rivers. We suspect it was probably brought in down through the railroad tracks, because we've been finding a lot of it along the railroad tracks, and it's probably blown into Salinas from that direction. Some of the first sites and locations we found of stinkwort were actually in San Miguel region area, and that's where we did find most of it this time in the riverbed. Next slide. I just want to thank all the fellow weed warriors out there that have contributed to the program, and all of my staff for their support, and Amy for putting this together. So, and if there's questions, I don't know, we're kind of running out of time here, but you can contact me later. If you do see Arundo anywhere, like Amy mentioned earlier, you can call me, and we can certainly follow up and look into it. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rusty. We really appreciate everyone presenting and bringing forward all the issues that we're experiencing with Arundo, what we're doing to address those issues, and kind of what the next steps are. Paul touched on it briefly. You could go in and do passive revegetation versus active revegetation. Passive being just allowing native succession to come through by removing the Arundo. The native vegetation will, in theory, respond and grow accordingly. Flooding events will come through and remove Arundo as well, but it could become downstream's problem. So we want to prevent that as much as possible. It's probably not very cost effective to go in and do active revegetation. It would require a lot more permitting and monitoring. It would be more of an involved process, but certainly possible on private property, especially if the landowner is willing to provide funding. The RCD can always go in and use that funding as a match to apply for other grant opportunities. So we also have, bioengineering that you can go and do after it's been removed to really stabilize the stream bank if erosion is an issue. All of these options are something that the RCD can help you with. So again, I just want to thank you to our partners and everyone who's participated in today's virtual workshop. You can find as I mentioned earlier, we've recorded this presentation. You can find our presentation on our website. I will post it there, as well as a PDF of the PowerPoint presentation that we presented today. If you know of someone that couldn't make it to the workshop, or someone that might be interested in learning more about Arundo and what's being done to remove it in the Salinas watershed, feel free to reach out to us. My email is on the screen there. And I believe we have one final poll before everyone heads out. So if you wouldn't mind just throwing up that last poll, Liz, and we'll see what you learned today after this wonderful workshop. Just give everyone a moment to submit their results. and a chance to read all the options. Great. Thank you, everyone. So good. I'm glad that this information was helpful and you're interested in learning more for the most part, and that you feel prepared to tackle Arundo eradication. Feel free to reach out to all of the presenters today. We're more than willing to help you in your Arundo eradication efforts. And as Rusty mentioned, if you happen to find some or know of some on your property, I believe we had one answer to the earlier poll that you are a landowner with Arundo on your property. So feel free to reach out if you need help with that. We have maybe a minute or two if anyone has any questions. You can feel free to unmute yourself and ask, but if not, I will end it there. Okay, doesn't look like we have any questions. So there we go. I realized I didn't share the results, there you can see the poll results for yourself. Great. And again, I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing there. Thank you all so much. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and we're all doing such great work to get rid of this Arundo problem. So I want to thank you all again for being here today, and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.